Yeah, we went through a period of time where inflation was far outstripping a flat public budget for curiosity-driven research. All the great discoveries come from investigators following their own curiosity to make those discoveries. Without that basic science, there's nothing to translate into new therapeutics. So we've been playing catch-up for a number of years. Thankfully, the Congress over the last 4 years has been continuing to try to narrow that gap that really evolved over 10-plus prior years. We're getting there. We need, though, those robust, sustainable, and really key supporters in the Congress to continue that support and get us to a point where we don't lose ground again. This is so important for public health. This is so important to take that science and continue our leadership role with discoveries that make a difference for people. I wish market forces would control the rising cost of generic drugs. The problem is generic drugs are a variety of different things, some of which are, let's say, pediatric cancer drugs, where there's a very small market. There's a very narrow margin on profit, and there's potentially big liabilities if something goes wrong. So there you could see that unless there's some incentive for production, the number of companies that are going to go into that production space is going to be limited, and we get the shortages we've seen over the past few years. So that's one set of problems, is supply could outstrip demand. In other ways, you've got unintended consequences of very well-intended legislation to try to push research into older generic drugs to show that they do or do not work. And in that case, if somebody invests in that, they have the right to have that indication under their control and potentially charge what they want for the drug. So that has led to some of the market inequities and some of the almost unthinkable predatory pricing of generic drugs because of the unintended consequences of that legislation. So I do think this is where public policy can be well thought out and where maybe we need different mechanisms to provide for the public needs of drugs that are off patent and now should be public goods. That's what makes pharmaceuticals different than many other things. During the period of patent protection, they're limited, and there's the ability for an individual company or a couple of companies to make profits on protected medicines. But eventually, all medicines go off patent and they go generic. And at that point, essentially anybody can produce them, and the prices should drop. We've also seen drugs like imatinib or Gleevec, when it was patent protected, the price hasn't dropped as much as I would have predicted. So again, why is the price so high? Why haven't lower cost producers come into that marketplace? I don't understand that either. So I do think we have an interesting thing that people smarter than I and more skilled than I in operational effectiveness and other manufacturing areas could come in and start to look at. I think journalists are super important right now to explain to the public just how exciting science is and what are the implications for basically everybody, for our quality of life, for our economic engine. So explaining that to the public is really what journalists do. And I think there are enough facts to go around to support that. So how can journalists explain this to the public? I also think this gets to the issue of science is mind-boggling in its complexity. The tools we have, the technology, have expanded and exploded over the past few years that even the most trained, the physicians, and many scientists don't understand technology if it's outside of their specific wheelhouse. So how can the public understand that? It's where we need different educational tools. We have educational tools that are interactive, they're more visual. This is where we have tools like internet journalism and such that everybody seems to want for free. That's another problem. Market forces fail there potentially. And where we have to figure out how to get the highest quality journalism and new journalistic tools in front of the public so they can understand this and why it's important for them to understand it. Eventually, even those of us who are not ill, we're all pre-patients. We have to understand this, either for our own health, for the health of a loved one, for the health of our community. We need people to be educated. The old Sims tagline, an educated consumer is our best customer, that applies to science as well. And I think journalism is key to the general public understanding that. And I'm confident we can help as professionals, and that's a lot of what AACR does. AACR and other professional organizations are a resource for the highest quality journalism, and we like to talk to journalists so that they have the tools they need to explain it to the public. I think in the United States we have a major issue about how we address drug pricing. As a professional who intersects with the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industry, and I'm on the board of 2 public companies, I have my own issues because I'm an academic, my heart and soul are in academia, but I also serve on boards. And I try to balance that by taking the long view. And I think that's one important thing for all of us. I think it depends on your perspective, if it's short-term, medium-term, or long-term. And I think one advantage for academics, we can be in it for the long term. Now, journalists have to have an even higher standard. They have to be completely dispassionate and objective at a time where even the facts, the different incentives and the different structures are poorly understood by the public. So I think the first step is that transparency of explaining to the public, what does the system look like? What are the incentives? What are the prices? What are the actual business models of government, the business model of private insurance, the business model of the biopharmaceutical sector players? They're all different, and they're very hard to understand. So I think the first thing is explaining in a way people can understand that, and then trying to help people and policymakers come up with solutions in those short-term, medium-term, long-term frameworks, which may be different depending on the timeline you're looking at. I also think it's a matter of getting the best people on both sides of the political aisle, on all sides of the constituency spectrum, from professionals to payers to regulators to insurers. We need that kind of respectful, thoughtful discussion, and not simplifying it and over-politicizing it as if anybody has the solution. It's much too complicated for simple solutions, but I think a respectful professional dialogue is what journalism can help us to find.